Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, a public radio journalist, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts. Especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and listeners of all ages, backgrounds, and parts of the globe to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts and get the sex ed we wished we'd gotten. This episode borrows its title from guest Tiffany Brec. It is the tagline for her company Little Shifts, with an F, Little Shifts Consulting. Tiffany has racked up many accolades and honors as a longtime gender violence educator who teaches inclusive and fact-based sexual health and consent to adults and children, the latter with puppets, which explains the episode cover art. She's also worked with student athletes as a survivor advocate and as a nonprofit leader, among other things. When we spoke, she had just launched littleshiftsconsulting.com, through which she also teaches trauma-informed, equity-centered leadership. Now, we all know a workplace or two or more that desperately needs this kind of help, so do not hesitate to reach out to her. Here, Tiffany talks about why healthy, inclusive sex ed is vital for reducing violence and harmful stereotypes, and shares pointers for the news media. We also discuss some traumatic topics, but I swear there is lightness too. Like my example of what to do when someone calls a man a girl in your presence, or how Tiffany's wife wards off shady men. Really, though, there are two absolutes for me with Tiffany. She will always make me laugh and beat me in darts.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am so excited. We are friends, although we've only known each other for a few months. We met on a panel when we were talking gender violence.
Yep.
And here we are now. And
yeah.
You are a sex health educator. You hold workshops and presentations for youth and adults on reproductive health, consent, healthy relationships, and LGBTQ issues from, in your words, an inclusive, medically accurate lens.
Yeah, so I started first at Planned Parenthood of the North Country, so in Plattsburgh. I was a sexual health educator.
New York.
Plattsburgh, New York. And it ranged from probably kindergarten to high school into college. And then over the years, even outside of my role at Planned Parenthood, I would weave in components of sexual health education into my conversations because they're so intertwined.
Can you walk me through, how do you break it down?
So like kindergarten up until like 4th or 5th grade, you're looking at sexual abuse prevention. And so within that, really focusing on consent, but what consent means at that age. And so making it age appropriate and I guess easy to understand. So like for kindergarten, 1st grade, you're talking about them having autonomy over their body and your private parts are yours and nobody's allowed to access them unless they have permission. And then you delineate between what that looks like with varying adults. So sometimes, you have to go to the doctor and the doctor will have to check you out. And so what is different about that situation than if you're at your best friend's house and another adult wants to have you take your shirt off, right? So that is a different situation. So kind of breaking that down in a way that is easy for them to understand. And so we'd use like the areas that your bathing suit covers. Those are your private areas. And the other part of the conversation is what's a good secret and what's a bad secret. Because oftentimes for that age group, you'll have folks who are trying to take advantage of them, particularly adults, say this is a secret. This is just between us. And so giving them an example of a secret that hurts you or makes you feel bad is probably a secret that you don't want to keep. But if your friend is telling you they have a crush on someone else in your class but don't tell anybody, that's not hurting anybody. So that's an okay secret. And so having that conversation. For kindergartners, the curriculum that we used, I would do a puppet show. There was Bert and Ernestine. So that was
Ernestine.
Mm-hmm.
I just got it.
Yep. So that was a lot of fun. And then when you get into middle school, then you're looking at puberty, trying to help them understand what's happening to their bodies. And then consent, that conversation, looks a little bit different. And then same thing on through high school. Basically, you kind of adjust the curriculum and the conversation to the audience. And you want to make sure that it resonates, it lands, and it's fit for that particular age group.
To go back to what I said in the beginning, inclusive and medically accurate. Does that mean that so much of it has not been very medically accurate?
Unfortunately, in the, historically, in regards to sexual health education, it's been heteronormative, often shame-based or focused on abstinence only, really gender binary, so boy, girl, leaving no room for anything in between, and fear-driven. You shouldn't do this because you might get an STI. You shouldn't do this because you might get pregnant. So it's all that shame, that fear, and that ends up being kind of a distraction, and it ends up truly being harmful because it has this negative connotation. And so there's no conversation about, if I'm not straight, I'm not included in the conversation. So essentially the opposite of that. You want to make it inclusive. You want to use, to the best of your ability, gender neutral terminology, or have varying examples that are inclusive. So folks feel that they are part of the conversation.
Does that approach apply also to sex abuse prevention? Or are they kind of separate things? Are we talking one is more sex ed, sexual education? What is sex? What to expect or not expect from it, as opposed, and then there's a separate conversation of like, this is sexual abuse. Like how, like, let's discuss only this.
It can be a mix of both. Most often it is, because when you start to have the conversation, it starts to get the wheels turning for folks.
Right.
And then they have examples, then they have questions. So you might end up talking about sexual abuse in this, what is meant to be a presentation on just sexual health or STIs. In my experience, the title of the presentation could be separate, but that conversation, those questions inevitably come up.
I've had so many women say, well, but you have to also talk about sex is so violent. I'm like, no, sex in and of itself. There's violence and there's sex.
Mm-hmm.
And there's violence through sex. I find so often when you start talking about sex, you really end up very quickly, when you're talking to women and men, you end up talking about crime, and trying to separate the two is hard.
Yeah. I mean, when I would go into certain middle schools to have a conversation about healthy relationships, and consent is a part of that conversation. But inevitably, I would have sometimes multiple students disclose or like ask a question in a way that indicated something else was happening behind the scenes. There was more to the question. So yeah, in my experience, it comes up probably 9 times out of 10.
When you have a young person that is telling you or intimating to you, are you a mandatory reporter? What do you do with that information?
Yes, I am a mandatory reporter. In that situation, what I would do is I would address the question enough so the student felt like they were being heard. And I would frame my response in a way that kind of takes the attention away from them. And then I make a mental note that I need to have a conversation with the teacher afterwards. And just to give them a heads up, like, they were asking this, they didn't directly say, but I just wanted to put this on your radar. I haven't been in a lot of situations where I am the one who has to take action, just because the relationship with the school who's having me come in and do the presentation, they're the ones who end up kind of being responsible on that end. But I'll always do a follow-up, like, hey, just checking in. Do you have any questions or you need help with local resources on how to handle this?
And that happens often enough?
Yeah. I mean, enough that it's memorable. It's more common in my experience for disclosures to happen at the college level, to be honest.
We've just jumped right in, and we will be talking about heavy things and difficult things. But also, I'm sure that there are humorous things as well.
The examples that come to mind, the first one is with Bert and Ernestine, the puppets, kindergarten, first grade. I was in a classroom, so folks who are listening to this, I am very tall. I'm 6'1".
6'1", yeah.
And if you've ever been in a kindergarten or first grade classroom, you know everything is incredibly tiny.
Yeah, I taught daycare for a while.
Luckily, I was younger and way more flexible, so I could like maneuver my body to hide behind something in the room. So one of the classrooms I was in, I was at a table and I had my arms up, my head down, and all the students are on the carpet. And as I'm going through the Bert and Ernestine conversation, I just get this feeling like something, they're closer. They're closer than they should be. And it gets to the end, and I pop up, and like, no exaggeration, pretty much every student was like on the table at this point. They had somehow just like ninjas, like baby little ninjas, like creeped up off of the carpet and slowly made their way to the table. I kind of think they just wanted to get closer to the puppets. So that, to me, every time I think about it, it cracks me up. Also, just like the thought of me having to crouch behind something small in the classroom and have my arms up. I intentionally would wear dark shirts because I would just end up sweating so much because it was kind of a workout. And then so part of that curriculum, where the consent piece comes is like asking people permission. So I think often with kids, they're forced to like give affection, to give hugs.
Yeah.
And so part of what we would talk about is like, it's okay if you don't want to hug somebody. And before you hug somebody, you should ask because maybe they don't want to be hugged. So you go through this, and that same class, I'm leaving, I'm saying my goodbyes. All those kids hugged me, whether I wanted them to hug me or not. And did they ask? No. But learning is an ongoing process. So that always makes me laugh.
Spontaneous displays of affection from kids are, especially that age, are really hard to rein in. Teaching them that they don't have to do it is probably more important than don't do it, right? Like you don't have to, as opposed to like planting that seed, or if you don't want to, be like, no, I don't want it.
The other story that comes to mind of like funny, I was at Syracuse University doing a presentation. I was talking about SANE exams, so sexual assault, nurse examiners, and the rape kit. But I said rape clit. And everybody's just kind
rape
of...
clit.
Yep, I said clit, and I paused. And everyone just kind of had this like, can I laugh? Should I laugh? And I was like, yes, let's talk about this. I said clit. That is funny, and it's okay to laugh. Just embrace it. It was a slip up. But what I meant to say is this. And you could feel like people started to ease up. But there's always, kind of working through that discomfort for me is, I find it humorous in the sense that once the conversation gets going, this is going to be so much easier.
When you're talking about kids learning that they don't have to be hugged, they don't have to hug someone or be hugged. I see like friends of mine who are progressive and aware of so many things, but will still be like, Natasha's leaving, go give her a hug. I'm like, no, XYZ does not have to give Natasha a hug. It's fine. To try and offset that. But also when you talk about consent and with little kids, so often we talk about teaching kids to say no. But when we're talking about predatory behavior, right, especially against the most vulnerable, like those questions are usually not even asked. Most people, if we're talking especially like when the power imbalance is huge, or any time really, but they're not gonna be like, can I do this to you? They're going to groom, prepare, but it might happen over an extended period of time. Right. So how do you teach parents to also understand that consent is it's a gray area. It's not black and white. It's not just like, okay, if you just learn to say no, you're good.
I feel like and I think this is just I'm going to focus on U.S. culture because that's where I'm from and where we are. There is a huge disconnect between the conversation of consent and sex versus what we're being exposed to. And the disconnect is there's no true conversation happening. It's often breezed over. And so for parents, when I would do sessions specific to parents, one, really challenging them to self-reflect. What are you comfortable with? What aren't you comfortable with? What information do you need to have these conversations? And then really kind of driving home the importance of having the conversation. Your kid's going to get exposed to this whether you want them to or not. If they don't have a phone, I bet you 5 of their friends have phones. And I bet you at least 3 out of that 5 probably have unlimited access to the internet. So they're going to get exposed. So equipping your particular child or children with knowledge and tools to kind of combat the negative side of this conversation is incredibly important. Whatever that looks like for you, it's up to you. I can't tell you specifically what to say because I'm not in your house. Those aren't my kids. But I can give you general guidelines. I can suggest resources and ways to frame the conversation that's not shaming. So when your kid does experience something difficult, or if their body is changing and they have no idea what is going on and they feel weird and uncomfortable, how you can address that in a way that's effective and not dismissive. This is why it's important to do kind of that self check. Like, what are you, because your kid's going to pick up on that. I mean, kids are very intuitive. They're going to pick up on the discomfort. And so if you are trying to have an informed conversation that is effective and sticks, then some of that self work is going to be really important.
What brought you to this work? When did you know or think or say, like, this is what I want to do?
I've just always gravitated towards it. But I will say in high school, I lost my sister to domestic violence. And
I did
that,
not know that.
yeah, so the summer before my senior year of high school, I call her my sister. She basically is. But I lived with her parents and they had become my guardians. And she was murdered in a domestic violence situation. She'd be considered like a secondary victim. The need for kind of justice, something that I think I was born with. And that experience motivated me even more. So I'd become like, I was a student vice president and I was a student representative for the security council at high school. And that journey just continued in college. You know, part of my final project in college, I had created kind of a living journal, and it kind of had resources, but also provided space for survivors to share their story if they wanted to. And then I was involved in various other forms of activism and advocacy during college. And then it just continued from there. I think before I actually started working for Planned Parenthood, I became a volunteer and I became a certified rape crisis counselor. So I would go to the hospital when victims presented and they wanted an advocate. And then that led into Planned Parenthood had an opening. I was genuinely interested in comprehensive sex ed. And the people that I worked with were amazing. And the conversation, like, it was a little nerve wracking at first because high school kids can be intimidating. But the more confident I became in the content, the easier it was. And then I just had fun with it. And I tried to really give off that vibe to any audience I was working with, that this doesn't have to be a negative, shamey, crappy conversation. Like, let's talk about the fun. Let's talk about the weird. Because our bodies are complex and sometimes we need help figuring it out. Because, like, is this normal? I don't know. Is it normal? Are you experiencing it? And just really trying to open some doors.
Your sister made me think of, I was actually talking about this in a lecture I gave at a university, a friend's class yesterday about, you said it was secondary, like she was a secondary victim to it. Like 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 are not the actual victims, but are bystanders or not the actual targets, I should say. They're all victims.
And this is actually probably really what a huge motivator. I don't remember in high school having conversations like I've been able to have with different groups. I don't remember really talking about red flags or healthy relationships or consent.
I don't think I even heard the word intimate partner violence until about a decade ago.
Yeah.
Out of high school.
I mean, for a long time, I was definitely angry because so her name is Dana. She had moved to Utica. She was going to college and then she got a job, or, you know, she was going to school. She also worked. And through her work, she met another woman. They became friends. Through this woman, we also became, and I say we because we all ended up hanging together and partying together. We got to know her boyfriend. His name was Bill. And we ended up over time hanging with Bill more. And nothing clicked. I didn't have any red flags, or I did have a gut feeling at times, but I didn't know what that meant at that age. And we eventually found out that he was abusing his girlfriend, and it escalated once she became pregnant, which is common. It abuse either starts or escalates when a female partner is pregnant.
And also homicide is the number one killer. It's a story I did. When you take every single separate category, it's the number one killer of pregnant and postpartum women. I
think for his partner, when she got pregnant and the abuse escalated, that for her, she did leave him. But, you know, while an order of protection is always recommended, it's not a shield. It doesn't make you invincible. And so he made the choice to attack her and her brother kidnapped their baby. He called Dana. Dana and I had a conversation, and we talked about what do we do. I mean, we're both young, clueless. I was like, I don't think we should get involved. I don't think we should help him. She's like, yeah, I don't think so either. And he ended up making a hit list, and she was the only one he got. Yeah, so there was a lot of incredible sadness. But there, that experience, there were other things as I look back where I was exposed to so much violence, and it often intersected with sex. And I don't recall having really productive or healthy conversations around sex or healthy relationships or consent. And in my adult life, knowing that that is problematic, again, huge motivator, incredibly passionate. I think comprehensive sexual health education that is trauma informed, diverse, inclusive, is not shaming at all, is essential for so many different things, just to live, honestly, just to live a safe and healthy, good life.
Right. I mean, even if what you're just talking about is like how to avoid mediocre relationships, right? Like things are like, meh, that are
like, oh no, I can do better.
Or maybe it's a good relationship, but mediocre sex. So how does that improve? To then what are the actual red flags and the things that are around us every day, but we're not connecting the dots, or people aren't connecting. Enough people aren't connecting the dots for us. And we'll talk about that too, like the media. We have a huge role to play. And in your experience, and by media, I mean news media, because social media is its own, like social media is any brain fart we have, we could just put it out. There's no vetting, there's no fact checking, there's no editing, there's no, you don't have like a second or third pair of eyes the way you do in most news media. Not all news media, but in your experience, does news media hinder or help like bad messaging?
It's a double-edged sword.
You can say what you want. I can take it.
I'm going to speak very, very broadly. When I think media, so I'm going to kind of separate news from entertainment. In regards to news, when they cover stories, they're always negative. So that, if I'm always exposed to on the news bad things associated with sex, then I'm going to, on some level, have a negative connotation just by that. And then if you look at entertainment, that form of media, yes, they get it wrong. Oh my God. So many things. The heteronormative piece, I mean, they focus on male desire. They make orgasms look incredibly easy. Like he just looked at her and she orgasmed. And it's like, oh, what?
That excludes so much of what is already the majority of the population, right? Of women.
Yeah. And there's just the complexity of it all. For media, that making it look just always easy. I think that is where they get it. I'm going to say just speaking about entertainment, they get it wrong. It's like, no, like I could really want to, but maybe I'm stressed. Maybe I'm tired. Like our bodies, again, are very complicated and very complex. And there are a lot of things that factor in whether or not, or how easily maybe we can have an orgasm. Like, and that's never talked about. And so particularly because I think the way that male characters are portrayed, it's like they always orgasm. And then
which also isn't true.
Right. And then for female identified people, you're watching, then you're like, but that's not my experience. Then you start to think something's wrong with you. So I think those are just some examples of maybe where media gets it wrong. Where they get it right is when they cover advocacy efforts, when they do stories that do actually raise awareness. If they're focusing not just on the negative, I think that's always important. How they frame stories is also incredibly important. Whatever your article is titled or how you set up your interviews, all of those things matter. And I think it's incredibly important to be very intentional about that, because that can shift how people are interpreting and retaining the information that they are receiving.
Right. If I had my way, I mean, I would mostly only focus on abusers now. If I'm doing stories on domestic violence, I would rather do stories that hold the people who do it accountable, as opposed to having the survivors of it tell the story over and over and over again.
I mean, yeah, if you have a headline that says woman gets raped on college campus, the focus is on the woman.
Yeah.
That's the first word. So then
Yeah.
then people's minds are, well, where was she? Where were her friends? What was she doing? What was she wearing? Da 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 da. And we totally lose sight of somebody raped her. Somebody made a choice
Right.
to violate her. Let's focus on that.
I'm blanking on her name. This Australian woman who has #fixed it, where she'll take headlines
Oh,
and change them. And there was one I was lecturing in a class about this. Woman gets raped on a Tinder date. It's like, what does Tinder have to do with it? There are endless headlines,
sure.
endless headlines that you could dissect. And, you know, I teach, like, there's one like man kills boyfriend over a video game fight. Like, it wasn't over a video game fight.
Right.
The video game had nothing to do with it. There was an escalation of violence.
And you're minimizing it.
You're minimizing it. Or when I've talked to journalists and, you know, they'll do a headline like man kills girlfriend because she called out someone else's name in bed. I'm like, how do you know?
Right.
Were you there?
Right.
No. We're now alibying. That is part of his defense. And you want to present a whole picture. But if you do that as a headline, if that's that's the first impact that you're giving people. And they're like, oh, okay. So she did something wrong. And then he did something bad. But she did something wrong. A, that's not, you don't know. And B, that's not a reason to kill somebody, to be killed. Like, that's like none of that is, but God, I could talk about this and I will, and I do talk about this for like hours and hours to students, to newsrooms, to anybody who will listen to me who is remotely related to journalism.
It's an important conversation any way that you look at it. And I remember how I grew up and no conversation. At one point when probably around 4th grade, I think at that point I was living in Texas, and I do remember going home with like a period kit. And I was like, I don't really know what's this like mini diaper? I don't understand. And my mom was no good at having a conversation about it. And so I either had to learn on my own or learn from TV, which I don't recommend either to anybody. So this is now years ago. So I have a younger sister. My wife and I talked about it, and we're like, I don't know how much she knows. And she'd come to stay with us in Syracuse, and we kind of started the conversation. And then, I don't know, maybe a month later, when I was visiting her, we bought her first vibrator. And I had a conversation with her about what it is.
How old was she at this point?
She was like a junior, senior in high school. And I said, obviously, whatever you do with this is your choice. I'm giving this to you because, and I kind of laid out why it's important to get to know your own body, try to position her so she doesn't have to rely on somebody else to get pleasure. So she's not dependent on somebody else. And probably almost immediately, her and her friends went into her bedroom, like pushed a chair up against the door. And I can only imagine like how they were like giggling and feeling all weird about it. But I was like, look, I did not get this. I want her to have this. Because when I finally learned about orgasming and sex, I was like, this is bullcrap. What? How did I not know this? And I didn't want her to have that same experience.
Data shows that men and women, when they masturbate, do so in the same amount of time, or they orgasm in the same amount of time. But yeah, I've never heard a 40-year-old man saying, "Yeah, I don't know how old. I was in my 20s till I orgasmed for the first time."
Yeah,
that is so normal for women to say. And I've talked to people who say, "Well, that's because like women have so much sexual trauma that they can't relax." And they can't orgasm. Like, again, you think you're not, but again, you're blaming the woman because you just have to look at like, that's just the definition of sex from, or orgasm from like a different perspective, not the male perspective. A few weeks ago when we were having dinner with you, Nicole, and you shared that article when you were a teenager and having come out as a teenage athlete. As a teenager and also you were an athlete. Two things really struck me from that. One, of how you exude this energy of like you just came into the world going like, I'm going to meet it on my own terms, right? It doesn't mean you don't make compromises. You don't make, like everybody that. And at the same time, it was just heartbreaking of like how often we hetero folks let down gay people, like by having that still be a thing. There's no point in time where I've ever had to come out
Mm-hmm.
publicly as being straight.
Mm-hmm.
And if straight people do, it's usually just to quash a rumor. People think I'm gay, but I'm not.
Right. I will say, like, in my younger years, I kind of college, I started to embrace more of like my feminine side. I enjoyed it. Like, if I getting ready for a presentation, in my 20s, maybe even to like my early 30s, I genuinely enjoy like straightening my hair, putting on some makeup, and putting heels on because I'm already 6'1". Why not be 6'3" also? Also, I'm going in to do a presentation with an audience that is 99% men. Yeah, I want to be 6'3". 6'1's not enough. The amount of times, like the idea, the coming out, it starts with, for me, it was like just exhausting and then just became annoying. Like the questions, and the questions and curiosity weren't rooted in my experience, in anything other than a guy, a cisgendered male, wanting something and being like, well, why don't you want me? Why don't you want my penis? Well, sir, because you have a penis.
Right.
That's why.
It's not personal. It's penisal.
It's also 6:30 in the morning and I'm pumping gas. I'm not interested. I'm not. This is not the time, not the place. Please go away. Go. Or even, my wife presents, and she's always presented feminine in our stage in life. I now present more masculine. She presents more feminine. And we talk about this. I have moments of like, I feel bad for her because she is still having to battle that. Like still having to say, nope, I'm married.
And you said like in front of you too. I'm going to straighten you out.
Yeah, you just haven't had the right penis.
Yeah.
Oh, stop. You're just making it worse.
Yeah.
You're making it worse. The times that it's happened right in front of me, one, I just laugh. Our relationship, our connection has always been incredibly strong. So when it's happened in front of me, I just laugh because I know how she's going to handle it. She's gone as far as, like, if it's been very obvious we're together, but someone will still hit on her, offer to buy her a drink, and she'll be like, sure, but you have to buy my wife one. And they do it. And I'm like, you're amazing. I love you so much. It makes me laugh every time.
Next time, and around for the bar.
Right. Oh my God.
Just be like,
yeah.
oh.
Yeah, we actually met at a sexual health conference.
And that was more than 10 years ago, right? 15 or
we met July 2009.
Twice as long as I've been with my partner, and this is the longest I've ever been with anybody. So I'm like really proud of 8 years.
As you should be.
It's a milestone for me. To go back to, I want to talk about when you talk about how you have spent a lot of time talking to men. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that connected to when you would speak to athletes or other training and educational workshops and presentations that you would do?
Sometimes it was very specific to athletes, depending on the curriculum I was using. And then, sometimes it would just be like a campus wanted me to come and do like a domestic or sexual violence 101, or come in and talk about consent or healthy relationships. So with athletes, the curriculum that I used heavily in my career is based on it's Mentors in Violence Prevention, targeted for collegiate athletes. And so oftentimes when I go to a campus, I would be working with female athletes, and then we do a mixed session with the coaches, a mixed gendered session. But here in the Syracuse area, same curriculum, but modified for the high school level. We would have the student athletes. Sometimes it would be a mixed group. And so we would have a male identified presenter and a female identified presenter. And so I think that also helped in a lot of those conversations. It wasn't just a woman coming to talk at these young men. Mm-hmm. We were there to talk with them. I would say majority of my experience was good. It was positive. Kids can be kids at any age. Mm-hmm. There was one group in particular, and this happened to be just male athletes. One of the students made a comment that if there's grass on the field, you should be able to play.
That's a new one. I've not heard that.
Oh yeah, it's unfortunately not my first time hearing that. So, as a trainer, as a presenter, I'm very authentically me. I'm pretty laid back. I want it to be an engaging conversation. I want people to walk away with something new or with new, like, be more curious. And then, depending on the audience and how they are interacting with me, there are times, I've had to be a little more authoritative, if you will. And so for this particular instance, he made this comment, layers and layers of problems, right? And so I had to tone switch. And I had to be very direct and say, all right, like, basically, like, if that is your perspective, here's what I need you to know. A young woman can go through puberty at 10. She can get pubic hair at 10. I need you to understand what that means. So if your mentality, if you're truly saying that you believe that, you're saying that it's okay to have sex with a 10-year-old. And when you frame it that way, then there's like backtrack. No. I'm like, oh, okay. So then, you add in, law and consent and not as a scare tactic. Genuinely, I want you to know, if this is truly your perspective, I want you to know this is the law. I want you to know what the possible consequences are if you live your life with this belief.
What was the reaction?
Silence.
Yeah.
Sometimes, comments like that will come up just to stir shit up. Right? They're trying to be funny. Like, I'm the cool, like, whatever, dude. Like, you're not the first one. Usually once I challenge them, it works. Like, they take a step back, and then kind of the added buffers coming to mind, but I'm not sure that's the right word. My male co-presenter, is also another voice that comes in. And so I'll take a step back and then I'll let him take the lead because it's coming from a male perspective. I know the female perspective.
Right.
This female's perspective, I shall say. And that, in my experience, has been an effective way to address that. I can think of only two situations where I've actually had to have a student removed because they are just being incredibly rude. And it's not, and I'm less concerned about myself, and I'm more concerned about the impact on the rest of the students in that particular session, which is, I think, good. All my years doing this work, to have only twice asked a student to leave a session, I'm comfortable with that.
Were they men?
One high school I was in, it was actually two girls and a boy. And then the other one was a single male student. That school, the adults in power were a huge problem. And I've seen that in pretty much at every level. How students are treated based on their gender. And then you layer on their race, and then you layer on if they're an athlete. And then, we can get into the power and control piece here.
Right.
Unfortunately, that starts really young.
It starts really young, and a lot of people reinforce it.
Oh, yeah.
We all get the same social messaging. Just how much do you believe it, right? How much do you counter it? How much do you, like, the stuff that's not healthy, that's dangerous, that's violent?
Yeah.
We forget the strained kind of overlap. We weren't there at the same time, but you were at Vanderbilt talking to, was it the male or female athletes at that point, or both?
So I was working full time, but I also did consulting work. And so with that same curriculum, so oftentimes when we were on a college campus, I'd be speaking to the female athletes. So yes, I was on campus.
In 2013 when the Vanderbilt rape case.
Yeah, that was intense. My years doing that, almost every session there was a disclosure from a female athlete. And 99.9% of the times their abuser or the person who caused harm was another athlete. 99.9% of the time is another male athlete. As a trainer, you're prepared for disclosures. This time was very different because we had no idea what was going on.
And for those who don't know, and I'm not going to go into the details, but it was 4 football players and an unconscious woman who had been dating or hooking up. It doesn't matter what the term is, with one of those players. When you were there when it exploded, that was 2013, and then it was tried. They were convicted, not all of them, but then there was a retrial. And that retrial is the reason I'm doing this in a roundabout way, because that is what made me dedicate my journalism, my reporting to gender violence. When I saw how poorly that was being reported, or it was a month into the retrial when somebody said they had been dating. And I thought, well, we need to say that every time, because that's this added layer that is very important.
I remember, getting on campus and you talk with the athletic director and folks on their team. So you get kind of the tour of the venues, which is fun. And sometimes they give you swag. And I remember getting a t-shirt and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? I'm young and broke. Free stuff is amazing.
Mhm.
And then, we sit down, we have conversation, and we do ask, what should we know? Nothing. And then we get into a session at some point, and the way that the curriculum is designed, not only does it break up by gender, but also so if you have a female team, they also want it to be mixed race. So representation matters. So I'm with another female presenter, and you always kind of beforehand have a conversation around, if disclosure happens, how do we want to handle it? And in this session, there were 3 or 4 disclosures, multiple, I mean, at least 4 to 5 to 6 young women breaking down crying. And there were only 2 of us. And so this was pretty early into when I started doing this particular consulting work. And so I'm having to continue the conversation in a way that helps take the focus off of the young women who are being triggered or disclosing. It was intense, to say the least. Then to see the news, all the news vans, and then to hear what was actually happening, I believe there was some hard conversations happening after that from our team.
For my part, I tried to lead the hard conversations in the newsroom of Nashville Public Radio, and truly from then became sort of the Energizer Bunny, and known as the Energizer Bunny of DV, NSA, of domestic violence and sexual assault, and had so many people come to me with stories. And every once in a while, somebody would be like, "Do you want a joyful DV story, domestic violence story?" I was like, "Yes, I do.
Absolutely.
Yes, I absolutely
all the time
do.
I'd prefer,
Yeah,
actually.
because I want to show people's resilience. I want to show that these are terrible things that
Right.
happen, but the trauma, like it doesn't plant you in that moment and you never come out of it.
Yeah, and I know we've ended up in this area of like gender-based violence, and this is why I think early on I made some comment like you can't. Unfortunately, it is
You can't separate.
it's incredibly almost impossible to separate this connection between comprehensive sexual health education and gender-based violence. When you, as a person living in this world, are taught that it is normal for men to be hypersexual. It is normal for men to be sexually aggressive.
In this modern world. Only in the West,
Yeah.
only in this modern world. As I'm learning, any other time in history, they would have thought you were crazy if you said that.
One of my favorite when I create presentations, if I'm able to, depending on the topic, I love to compare and contrast like vintage advertisements to modern advertisements. And if you really look at them, not a whole lot has changed. The difference is advertising is a little more covert now, whereas in the 1940s, 50s, it was incredibly direct. Like they just said the thing. Women are bad drivers.
Right.
She's the one who cooks. She didn't have dinner ready, and what's he supposed to do? Like
Right.
very direct. And now it's just more covert. It's still there. These issues are so. The issue of gender-based violence is so incredibly prevalent. That's the indicator that not much has changed.
Right.
Yes, we've made progress, which is incredible, and we're currently backtracking.
Yes, we are.
And that's scary because it was already scary. And now you have a different kind of conversation happening, a different subculture of people who feel emboldened, who feel they're in the right to hurt others. And that absolutely intersects with this conversation.
I'm speaking to a woman. She's a former police officer and now teaches lectures in England on coercive control, and saying like when so often we see this kind of a backlash, like what we're seeing politically when women gain a big step in their agency, right? And then she's like, well, what do we do? I guess we'll weather this backlash and the violence that comes with it like we always do, and then we will keep pushing. And it's just like, and I yesterday, one of the students that I was when I was guest lecturing asked, do you think it's better? Do you think the world is better now than it was. I was like, ask, like,
Can you
it
be more
depends.
specific?
It depends the day that you ask me. In terms of my report, in terms of GB, in terms of gender violence, it's like, yes, legislatively, in the collective conscience, like, we do believe people more often than we used to. I'm not saying more often than not, but more often than we used to. And there are laws that exist that even 20, 30 years ago didn't exist. But like, I'm really struggling to figure this out right now. Like, how do you deal with burnout? Often for me, the burnout is also pitching stories on gender violence and being told, well, we did a story last month. We did a story on domestic violence last month. We did a story on sexual violence last month. I'm like, yeah, but in America, every minute someone's being sexually assaulted. When I teach newsrooms, like, raise your hand if you know someone's been shot or stabbed. Hardly anyone does. Like, raise your hand if you know someone who's been sexually assaulted. Keep it up if you know 3 people. Keep it up if you know 10. Most hands stay up. I'm like, okay, then why aren't you, if you understand how prevalent it is, why aren't you covering this all the time? And a friend who works for an NGO, worked for various NGOs in Croatia, was like, pace yourself. A few years ago when I saw him, he was like, pace yourself. Like, yeah, I know. And still, I find myself, 3 years later, I'm like, oh, I don't know how to pace myself. I don't, like, it's so obvious. So many of these things are so obvious. And they lie at the intersection of prejudice, of so many types of prejudice, right? Because even the word racism, I will teach students, is racist in and of itself, in the sense that, which I'm not saying don't use it or that it doesn't exist, there's only one human race. So, right? So when we use that, we're also, we create divisions.
Just
and
don't
then
say reverse racism, because that's not a thing.
No. Yeah, wouldn't it be funny if, like, at this point in the conversation, I'm like, let me tell you, like, what about heterophobia?
Right. Oh my God.
You just hear, like, like a door slam shut. Where'd she go?
It's not over.
No.
Burnout.
No,
So,
I do not mean it in that way at all.
Yeah, no, I
Like,
know. I'm just teasing. But your question, burnout. Honestly, I will say the work itself doesn't burn me out. I find it incredibly motivating and energizing. I would much prefer to live in a world where I didn't have to do this. Regardless of identity, I want people to grow up with confidence. I want them to feel safe. I want them to be curious and supported. The thing that burns me out is shitty leadership. Just upfront. I don't tolerate hypocrisy well. I expect that if your mission is to do this thing, then you do the thing and you do it right. I'm not saying it's perfect, but you do it right. You don't get to harm others in the process.
or at least you try to do it right? You thrive.
Yes.
You strive. You do.
You
your
hold yourself.
damnedest.
Yes. And when you get it wrong, you hold yourself accountable and you do better next time. I expect that of myself, and I expect that of leaders that I work with. And that's the burnout comes from having to constantly, it probably feels similar like you pitching ideas, of having to constantly call leaders with more power, legitimate power than I have had in the moment, of having to call them out and call them out and call them out, and then get gaslit and then be like, wait, no, nope, I'm not going to do that. That's where I get kind of exhausted and tapped. But the work itself, genuinely love it. Really enjoy the conversation because there's so much good that can come out of it. That's essential. I don't think, in my humble opinion, I don't think comprehensive sex ed should be a question. I don't think it should be an afterthought. I don't think it should be an option. I think it's essential that it is in every curriculum at every stage in life. Because otherwise, we're doing a disservice to younger generations. We're doing a disservice to children. We're doing a disservice to teenagers and young adults when we don't equip them with the knowledge and tools to navigate the world. And sex education is a part of that.
We're all having sex. Almost all of us are having sex. And why not do it without shame and with the greatest amount of pleasure and communication possible?
Yeah.
Like, it seems like a pretty simple, straightforward.
You would think. The curriculum that I used to use for collegiate athletes, and I've also used it in the high schools in this area. One of the activities we would do was around gender roles. And if you've ever seen the Barbie movie, Barbie basically took this activity, at least a part of the activity, if you've watched the movie, there's a part where basically they just are listing like all the mixed messages that women get, right? Like, so you need to be skinny but not too skinny. You need to have curves but you can't be fat. You can be smart but don't let them know that you are smart. And so this activity, we do the female stereotypes and we do male stereotypes. And one of the first things that when we talk about male stereotypes, it's penis size. Like this expectation that you're supposed to have this huge penis because, you can control that. And then you look, if somebody doesn't align with these social expectations, how do we let them know? And so what do we call women and what do we call men? And when you look at how we shame women and what we call women when they don't conform, it all has to do with our bodies and not our brains. Our value is in our body, what we do with it, how we present it, and who has access to it. And then for men, if you look at all the kind of dominant words that we use to shame men, at the core, the message is the worst thing that you can be is a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, think about that. The worst thing we teach young men, teach men in general, because it gets reinforced, the worst thing is to be a woman. Shit.
I had a flashback to these dear friends in Nashville, and I was at their house when I was living there, and some of their friends I never met were visiting in town. A man and a woman who had 2 sons and a daughter. And their sons were like, one was college age, one was high school, and their daughter was, 7 or 8. And you could see that the father was just in love with this little girl. Mm-hmm. Later in the evening, maybe there were like 8 or 9 of us sitting at this table along with the 2 sons, because the little girl's fast asleep. And the father, don't know what the older son said, but the father said, "Don't be such a girl." Without even thinking about it, I just went, "Fuck you." Everybody turned to look at me, and my friends were like, "This is why we bring her to parties." And the guy was like, "What?" I was like, "You just, to insult your son, you just called him one of me. You called him one of your wife, and you called him your daughter. Fuck you." Mm-hmm. I'm tired of listening to this. I'm tired of how easily you say that without even thinking about it, without any shame. And then there was a silence. I don't even remember what happened after that.
You're like, I blacked out.
I don't know that he apologized, but it was just like, the stars in his eyes when they were playing together, right? And still, that's the message that you're giving her. She's not there that moment. She was asleep, but in other moments,
yeah,
she heard that.
Yep. I'm glad you said it.
I mean, I am too. Like, I have no regret, no shame about that.
Sounds like something I would do.
So my last thing that I want to talk about is, like, you're going solo. You have just launched a company, and you're going to be doing this now, not through another organization, but by yourself. You want to talk about that? Like, what led to that? What it's called?
Little Shifts Consulting.
Shifts.
Yes. And that's very intentional. Obviously, these issues are incredibly serious, and they can be incredibly difficult. The way that I like to approach them is with a good balance of realism and humor and humanization. We are people in a room having a conversation, and that conversation will look differently depending on what our objectives are, what you want to get out of the conversation. So I can shift really easily from kind of casual humorous to very direct and very serious if need be, based on the vibe. What led to this is I've grown incredibly tired of working for really bad leaders and organizations that don't necessarily live up to their mission. I just can't do it anymore.
God, I just want to let out the longest, biggest sigh of like, yes, I understand.
Yeah. At least in, most of kind of my later professional career, this has always been in the back of my mind because I do love the work so much, and I like to be really creative and think outside the box in how I approach the conversations. So timing feels right. So I've decided to, go out on my own. It'll be service-based consulting training around gender-based violence prevention. And that can really encompass, a lot of the things that we were talking about. So what that, we could look at workplace sexual harassment, domestic and sexual violence 101, consent, depending on what people are wanting and who the audience is. If it falls under this umbrella, I'm someone who can come in, run a training. I can create customized tools for your team or your organization. If folks are interested in knowing more or curious and want a presentation or a workshop, they can use my email. So it's Tiffany, Tiffany, Brec, Brec @gmail.com. Even though it's early stages, though, I still have decades of experience, and I would love to talk to you.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I was like, we're going to have an hour conversation. It's like, no, we're like...
No, that's not going to happen. I know the first time when we had coffee for the first time, I think we ended up talking for like 3 hours.
I think so, yeah.
And it just rolled, though.
Yeah.
It just rolled, and I love that. I mean, honestly, like this is something like this, but give me a cold beverage and a dartboard, and I could be here for hours.
When we went and played darts, the only time we played darts so far, and you absolutely kicked all of our asses, you and me and our respective partners, you happened to sit, the table we were sitting at, you just sat next to a little vulva. Somebody had graffitied the wall, a wall that was full of graffiti, and just said pussy power. Yep. And I looked over, I was like, look, and I just took a little picture like you.
It was wonderful.
It wasn't derogatory. It was pussy power. So
it was pussy power. And I approve that message.
And I think we should end right there.
Woo. Awesome.
That was Tiffany Brec. And listeners, if you or your friends or colleagues are looking for trauma-informed, humane, and humorous training on leadership skills, sex ed, gender violence, and more, you will want to engage Tiffany. She just shared her email with us, and you can also reach her via littleshiftsconsulting.com. A transcript of this conversation and links to her site and socials can be found on the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 12. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Stojanovic. Website design and artwork is by Ted Nunez. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.